Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. 2 people were killed in Libya overnight as protesters angry at the killing of America's ambassador stormed the headquarters of several Islamist militias, demanding that the militias be disarmed. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. And President Obama criticized Congress in his weekly address this morning for failing to pass the Farm Bill and other legislation. We're going to take a look at how Democrats are suddenly putting up a fight in battle for control of Congress later in the program. But right now, I'm joined by my friend, John Nichols, Washington correspondent, and my colleague at The Nation magazine, an associate editor at the Capital Times in Madison, Wisconsin. L. Joy Williams returning to the program, a political strategist and co-host of the podcast and syndicated radio program This Week in Blackness, also baked this amazing tray of banana bread, which was really just too kind of you. Thank you very much. It's delicious. I already had a piece. Kevin Williamson, deputy managing editor at the National Review, and Anna Marie Cox, founder of the blog Wonkette, and now a columnist at the Guardian newspaper. Great to have you guys all here. All right. Well, this was quite a week. Quite a week in the campaign. Quite a week in the campaign. The latest national poll released Friday from the National Journal has Mitt Romney trailing President Obama nationally 7 points among likely voters, while swing state polls from NBC and the Wall Street Journal released Thursday have Romney down by 5 points in Colorado and Wisconsin and down 8 points to Obama in Iowa among likely voters. And it's a testament to the kind of week Mitt Romney's had that it has to count as good news for him that this is all he's down. The Romney campaign's rough week kicked off when Politico ran a rather nasty hit job on Romney's chief campaign strategist Stuart Stevens, chock full of anonymous quotes lamenting the train wreck the Romney campaign was in the process of becoming. That was quickly overshadowed by video released by Mother Jones magazine and obtained by NBC News of Mitt Romney speaking to donors at a private fundraiser in Florida.
There are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe that government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it.
I think people are entitled to health care and housing, but that's just me. Food? Also, you name it. You are entitled to you name the thing that you want. And he, Mitt Romney, you probably have seen this video, but we're going to play it again.
And again.
Don't think we won't. Mitt Romney went on to explain why he would never reach those voters.
47% of Americans pay no income tax. So our message of low taxes doesn't connect. And he'll be out there talking about tax cuts for the rich. I mean, that's what they sell every 4 years. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never think they said they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives.
Mr. Romney scrambled to respond to his now infamous 47% comments with a visibly impromptu press conference. He followed up Tuesday with a more on-message interview with Neil Cavuto on Fox News. On Wednesday, Romney tried to clarify at a Univision forum that he's all about the, quote, 100% of America. That same day, Paul Ryan, his ticket mate, called Romney's comments, quote, obviously inarticulate. And yesterday afternoon, to cap it all off, the Romneys released their full tax returns from 2011, revealing that they purposely limited their charitable deductions in order to bring their effective tax rate up to 14.1%. All right, where do we start? Let's start with the taxes and work our way backwards, because I thought the tax move, I guess I could understand the idea of, well, it's been our worst week on the campaign, and we might as well just go for broke and try to shoot the moon, basically, and get all this out. And I just thought the idea that they literally, and this is our Bradford Malt, who is the trustee, explaining, do we have the language of that here? There it is. The Romneys' generous charitable donations in 2011 would have significantly reduced their tax obligation for the year. The Romneys thus limited their deduction of charitable contributions to conform to the governor's statement in August, based upon the January estimate of income that he paid at least 13% in income taxes in each of the last 10 years. So just so everyone's clear, they picked a rate that they needed to hit, and then they didn't take their deductions. Kevin Williamson, you're shaking your head. I would find it, as a conservative, I would find this deeply offensive.
Well, I'm really upset that Romney has not come around to the Williamson creed, which is that tax evasion is a form of patriotism. not only is
you should be running the campaign.
Not only is this guy willingly paying his taxes, he's paying more taxes than he has to pay. one of the few things Romney's ever said that really made me happy about him as a candidate was if I were paying more taxes than I'm actually legally obliged to pay, then I wouldn't make much of a president. I agreed with him on that. Why are you throwing money away? I mean, I like the fact that on a typical year he makes about, Barack Obama's net worth and gives it away like it's nothing. And that's all great. But, why throw money at this, this evil cabal of half-educated thieves and pimps we call government?
and you know what?
Okay, and your response?
It's consistent with him sort of just conforming himself, to what he said in that moment. So he consistently changes and tries to conform his life and conform his talking points and conform his campaign, to fit this narrative of trying to be the president that he says he wants to be.
And what American really doesn't sit around trying to figure out what tax rate they want to hit?
Right. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I think,
I do.
So many.
Zero.
Really, your average
Actually,
working.
if you're trying to figure it out,
average
usually
working
that's it.
class American, they really spend probably March and early April just thinking, I don't know if I want to hit the 34% this year or something like that. And to me, I will tell you that if the Romney campaign, it appears the Romney campaign did not, this is true, he actually does have some kind of trust with this, because they obviously did not consult with this guy about what to say. That is quite clear.
Actually, this raises an interesting point, because the taxes were released by the trustee of the quote unquote blind trust, that is the Mitt Romney blind trust. The trustee of that trust, as I pointed out on Rachel Maddow's show last night, is the personal family attorney. Okay, so this is not they call it a blind trust, but it's not a blind trust in any actual way.
It's sort of a Magoo trust.
No, Magoo is legit.
But so when you can walk into your personal attorney and under attorney-client privilege be like, so here's a blind trust.
Here's the tax rate I need to hit.
Here's the tax rate I need to hit. It's not blind.
What I think is interesting is I think Kevin's defense of the Romney tax situation is probably the most consistent that I've heard. The other one I've heard is that if you count those charitable donations as taxes, then he paid a lot in taxes. But that strikes me as odd that you get to count those like as taxes, but payroll taxes, on the other hand, don't count.
Exactly. And I would also say, from the conservative perspective, Kevin, the reason I'm glad you're here is because you wrote this piece that got a lot of.
I'm here.
You wrote this piece that got a lot of attention. I couldn't tell how much of it was sort of tongue in cheek, how much of it was kind
of
of. No, really? None of it was in tongue in cheek? Oh, well, then I have to revise my opinion of it. It was basically like, your thesis is just embrace that you're
the rich guy.
Be the rich guy. Like, embrace it. Like, you called it like a boss.
I want him to sail up to the convention on his yacht. And, get off in a fur coat, drive his rolls up, do whatever he has to do. I mean, the guy's $250 million. Quit pretending like you're some, schmuck from Nebraska.
Basically, take cash from
I'm from Nebraska, number one. I'm from Nebraska, number two.
Schmuck from Ohio.
Our goal today, viewers at home, is to get, if the people who don't like Stuart Stevens, who are giving those anonymous quotes to Politico, really want to stick the knife in, we need Kevin Williamson running the Mitt Romney campaign. So if anyone's watching, anyone with the power to make that happen is watching.
I'm going to defend I think Kevin's point is exactly right. I'm not being...
No, authenticity. I sort of agree.
America has... for a country that fought, to get rid of inherited wealth and inherited power.
Is that what we fought for?
You bet you we did. We fought against colonialism. And
so
we
they
fought
expropriated Jefferson?
We fought against empire. And it was a good fight. But as a country that fought against empire, we have ended up with an awful lot of rich people presidents. And the bottom line on this thing is the rich guy presidents have, if they're smart, you look at Roosevelt and others, you look at even Kennedy, they have figured out how to live rather glamorous lives, to live rather large, but to communicate that while living large, they have a little bit of concern for the little guy. Romney's problem is not that he is rich. Romney's problem is he cannot communicate that he has a little concern for the little guy.
Yes, and I think there's also this awkwardness and this indeterminacy and this sort of shape-shifting that is perfectly, as you said, Joy, I think perfectly embodied in this idea of, I said this thing offhandedly to defend myself against the charge of being a freeloader plutocrat, and now I will reverse engineer my taxes around the fact that I said that thing to hit the
That's
rate.
what the entire tape does, too.
Right.
Yes. I mean, it just sort of makes it look like he will say anything in any given situation, he will say what people want to hear, which is what every politician does. But Mitt Romney's just worse at it.
Some do it much smoother. Here is the Mitt Romney. We should play this because you mentioned it, and Anna, you wrote it, which is Mitt Romney I think also calling himself unqualified to be president because of what he just now proved to do. So maybe you have to reverse engineer that if you had a time machine. Here it is.
I don't pay more than are legally due. And frankly, if I had paid more than are legally due, I don't think I'd be qualified to become president. I think people would want me to follow the law and pay only what the tax code requires.
Here's the thing.
Yeah, wait. Best coda on this, and I'm going to let you jump in. He, of course, has 3 years to file an amendment to his returns, as all Americans do, which means I just had this vision of them sitting in the hotel suite on election night as the returns come back. Yeah. And as soon, if he doesn't win, or even if he does, that would be the true boss thing to do. As soon as it's decided, like on the phone with Brad Maltby, like, file that amendment. I want that $300,000 check from the government right away. We're going to take a break and talk more about it after this. All right, Joy, I'm sorry I cut you off. You wanted to make a point about about Mitt Romney's taxes. Well,
the conversation here is I think he needs to take cues from other hip hop artists, and in terms of our culture, they can be gaudy, they flaunt what they have, cars, they go on, and still are able to communicate to people who are not at their level or will never reach their level that they believe in them and that I'm the same as you. I came from that.
But there's been, I was going to say, they came from that. I mean, there's been an upward trajectory in the lives of a lot of hip hop stars and other rich people. I mean, William, we'll get to in a second. But Mitt Romney, also in that tape, he talks about being born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He just admits it straight up, which is great, to be honest. I think there's a lot of honesty on that tape. But he's never had to struggle for anything, ever.
Right.
And can I say
I think that's a thing that makes him different from Donald Trump, that makes him different from a rap mogul, that makes him different from most Americans.
Can I just sum this up, though? It's that with rap artists, they are flamboyant, gaudy perhaps, but they make people want to be them, right? Mm-hmm. In reality, nobody wants to be Mitt Romney. That is a fundamental reality.
I think they would like to have his taxes.
They would like his money, but he is not cool. But he is not cool enough.
Right.
So that is maybe the challenge.
But also this relatability thing happens. I mean,
look,
there's. I mean, let's be clear here. I mean, there's a sort of way that you project as a person, and I think you're right. There's ample examples in American history of people that came from quite a bit of wealth, or even not just wealth, inherited privilege, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And there's the great JFK.
Trump being one.
Right. Trump being one. His father was a real estate mogul. But I'm talking about presidents, right? So FDR came from inherited privilege. Mm-hmm. JFK has a very funny line about his father saying that that he wouldn't pay for a blowout, right? That he's like he wants him just to barely win because his father didn't want to play for a blowout. And that was a sort of joking recognition of his own wealth and privilege, right? So there's a sort of personal communication, and then there's the agenda and the policy. I think if you're a Democrat, mm-hmm. if you're FDR, mm-hmm. who's probably the most redistributive Democrat in the last 100 years, right? Or maybe Johnson, right? Johnson, of course, did come from quite hard-struggle background.
But he came up the good way by marrying into wealth.
That's true. He also married into wealth. But the whole point here is that the policies also matter, right? There's a sort of way you project, and there's policies, and that's why I think to sort of bring us back to the 47% line. I mean, there's the fact that under Mitt Romney's own tax policies, right, he would pay about 2% effective rate, right? Because he wants to massively. What's that?
And under Paul Ryan's would pay almost nothing.
Probably zero.
He would drive a truck to his house and deliver.
We should also note these 20-year. They had this notarized note about the 20-year average, right? The genius there in the 20-year, and this is, I think, too cute by half. From 1990 and 1997, of course, which is now included in the 20-year average, the capital gains tax rate was 30%, which is twice what it was now. It then went down to 20-something for the next 4 or 5 years, and then finally the full Bush tax cuts kicked in. So part of the reason they're doing this 20-year average is so that they could bake in the cake from 1990 to 1997 when they had to pay a 30% rate. But let me finish this point. I'm talking too much. No. I see your skepticism. But the point here, and this gets us to the 47% thing to me, is that there is a synthesis here between a policy vision about taxes and redistribution and what American people should do and who makes the American economy run. Mm-hmm. And I think there's genuine contempt that's shown in the show, just to not be funny for a second. I don't know if it's genuine or not, or he's pandering to the contempt of the people he has in the room, but to say these people won't I can't convince them to take responsibility for their lives. It's just really an unbelievably jerky, offensive thing to say about people that about half the population. I know I'm not like making some grand, insightful, analytical point that no one else has made this week, but it really, really angered and offended me. I mean, people work really freaking hard, and
well, some of them do.
And some of them do. Right, that's right.
One of my favorite novels is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and it has a character in it sort of a pickup artist, and his line is, "Tell me what sort of man you like, and I'll pretend to be that sort of man." This is what he tells women all the time, just up front. Romney kind of is that guy as a presidential candidate. I mean, whatever crowd he's in front of, he's very sort of malleable in terms of his rhetoric. I think what he did in this particular situation, though, was conflate two things. There's about half of the population that doesn't pay any federal income tax, and there's about half the population which is some level dependent on government subsidies of some kind or government entitlements of some kind. And but those are two different things. They're not the same group of people, and there's overlap, but they're very.
There's also a third group, right? He conflated three groups. There's people that are and dependent here in terms of what you're saying, government subsidies. There's a broad range of things, right? Everything from subsidized student loans. If you price in everything,
we're talking about people who get a household check, from the government, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, one of those things.
Income tax credit, transfer, disability.
That are earned benefits.
But the point, right? That are earned benefits.
Well,
let's talk about that in a second. But the third group here,
who served in wars probably earned their benefits.
Okay, and the other 98% of that group we can talk about.
Not 98.
Well, but the third thing that he conflated here, there's people that are dependent on some government program or subsidized with the government in some way, or drawing from earned benefits, or the recipients of the payouts on social insurance. There are the 47% who don't pay federal income tax, of course, paying payroll taxes. There's only about 10 or 15% or something who don't pay any federal taxes, and then there's the 46 or 47% of the electorate that's going to vote for Barack Obama pretty much no matter what. Right. And those are three distinct categories that he just took and shoved together. And the thing I said in the reaction to the videotape was that this is just malpractice as a basic political analytical understanding of what the electorate is. Yeah. Like, you are running for president. You should understand at a very granular level who is the electorate and who are they voting for and what is the kind of distribution of who they are. And this is a unbelievable misunderstanding of the electorate.
Well, yeah, what I've been thinking about, what Mitt Romney's week has been like, he said that paying more than he needs to an income tax would disqualify him as president. Saying that should disqualify him as president. The way he's been running his campaign should disqualify him as president. I mean, it's tempting, as journalists, I agree with a lot of the media criticism that we cover the process too much. The process doesn't always have a lot to do with actual issues at hand. But sometimes when you run a campaign that seems this maladroit, it seems like it's a bad indicator of what kind of commander-in-chief you might be.
And to that point, I think about that is like, if you cannot even manage the small campaign team that you have to put out a message, to communicate your policies, to all of those things, how can you run a country?
I would say, though, the inverse of this is a great Onion headline that I remember about being, what was it? It was something like Iraqis stunned by Bush campaign competence. It was about the fact, wait a second, these guys really do know what they're doing.
One thing to keep in mind about Romney, though, is that there's a big difference between voters, who they are, and who they think they are. If you ask people what they think their tax rate is, whether they think they're receiving government benefits, it does match up with reality very closely.
This is the submerged state we've talked about on the program. Hold on 1 second. I want to take a break and continue the conversation after this. All right, John Nichols, sorry, I cut you off for
this commercial break.
Yeah, well, we need him.
I was just going to say that I think one of Romney's big problems is that he has been such an amorphous candidate. He, as we've suggested, he's been a liberal Republican, a conservative Republican, and a moderate Republican walk into the bar, and the bartender says, "Hello, Mitt." And the bottom line is he's been all over the place. The one thing that he did that was firm was pick Paul Ryan for his vice president. Now, when he is in front of a group of folks saying, I got a problem with this 47% that don't pay taxes, I'm not going to worry about them, I can't get them. Well, you're like, maybe Mitt will change tomorrow. Paul Ryan won't. Paul Ryan is absolutely committed to going after those programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Pell Grants, all this stuff. And I think you put the two of them together, and you get a very scary message for America.
And I think I want to play this because there's a strain in there. This idea of the kind of the freeloader class as a kind of class analysis. I mean, the hilarious thing here is that, again, the political analysis here, I think, is just wrong and naive. Like, it's wrong empirically in terms of who the groups are, but also just naive. It's a weird inverse an inverse version of the most vulgar kind of like Marxist leftist aspiration of class-based politics. Like, we're going to get all the people, the bottom 60%, and they're going to vote their class self-interest against the top 40%, which of course never happens in American politics because people's identities are amazingly fractured in a million different ways, right? So it's a bizarrely naive kind of class analysis or political analysis, but it is a strain in modern conservative thinking increasingly about this kind of problem of makers versus takers. As that's a defining axis. Here's Paul Ryan talking about makers and takers at the Economic Club.
Chasing ever higher spending with ever higher tax rates will decrease the number of makers in society and increase the number of takers. Able-bodied Americans will be discouraged from working and lulled into lives of complacency and dependency.
Now, here's the thing about that statement, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Kevin, because able-bodied Americans will be discouraged from working in lulled into lives of complacency and dependency. The reason that so many people have been taken off the federal income tax rolls are a series of tax credits often started by Republicans, advocated by Republicans, expanded by Republicans, intentionally as policy. The earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, which was massively expanded under Bush and in the Bush tax cuts, that has taken people off the rolls as a kind of essentially conservative form of policy grounded in the economic theories of Milton Friedman specifically, that the most efficient way, the earned income tax credit, right? The most efficient way of, you don't want to have a lot of kludgy government programs. You want to just efficiently distribute through the tax code, through these credits. And one of the things that this has precipitated, this 47%, is a kind of civil war among Republican and conservative wonks about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, you really do have two sort of separate strains of thought in the conservative world about this. You have the sort of libertarianish kind of view that the fewer people on the tax rolls, the better. And then you have a lot of people, and I'm sympathetic to this view, that you're creating sort of an operational problem when you have a large group of people who are sort of net tax consumers versus people who are net taxpayers. And it's the old thing about, democracy survives until people discover they can vote themselves largesse out of the public treasury. Now, I think to some extent those concerns are overblown. But they are real. And I've always sort of disliked the kind of right-wing talking point about people who don't pay federal income taxes, because of course most people, even very poor people, tend to pay a lot of taxes in the form not only of the payroll tax, but sales taxes, things like that,
and quite regressive ones.
Well, and we also forget that, for instance, poor people in a lot of the country pay in effect higher real estate taxes than other people do, because they're paying it through their rent, and commercial properties are often taxed at a higher rate than residential properties, and of course homeowners get tax credits and things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
So I mean, there are things about that. I mean, it's hard to get a really good read on what people pay in taxes. Now, most people, like me anyway, thinks everybody pays too much, and we'd like to see just less of everything across the board. But using that as a kind of wedge point to sort of go after people rhetorically seems to me not maybe the best way to go about things.
Is this similar also to the health care? Universal health care was also a Republican, or at least the
Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, it sort of came from this as well. And so, the mandate.
Yeah, I mean, the Heritage Plan, everyone talks about Obamacare being based on the Heritage Plan. There's a lot of differences.
Right.
And there are lots of ways.
It's really based on Romney Care.
Well, in a lot of ways, yeah. And there are lots of ways to do a mandate. I mean, the Swiss system is very different from what we just voted in a couple of years ago. And they both have mandates, but they're very different kinds of programs.
The point here, I think, is that sorry, Anna Mary.
Well, I was going to speak to this idea that people vote themselves largesse, and the conflation of all these three different groups. Political science, they don't. People do not actually vote themselves largesse, especially towards the lower end of the income spectrum. The people who do that are rich people. The people who use the political system to create tax breaks for themselves, to create money-make opportunities for themselves, are the people at the top. And the people at this other place don't. But this also gets to voter ID, actually. Yeah. This idea that there are people who are looking at the government as a way to get their money and will vote for the person who gives them their money is one of the tactics that people use to try and enforce voter ID laws.
If you take a drill, an analytical drill, and you start drilling into this Republican campaign, and you drill down through this quote, and you drill down to voter ID, where you hit bedrock is, I think, an age-old conservative skepticism of democracy. Yeah. I mean, the line about and
certainly in my case.
And I'm saying that's a genuine, long-standing conservative view, and it's one that is because we live in a democracy and people have to get themselves elected.
Well, I mean,
you normally can't go around saying
conservative. If you think of the Constitution as being conservative, I mean, there's a reason we have a republic instead of a democracy.
Right? No, that's what I'm saying. I get that email from conservative people all the time.
It's an striving toward democracy, as Dr. King said, and we may yet get there. But the important
I hope
thing,
not.
I rather hope
for a campaign.
It's why it's good we're both on the show here in this democratic experiment. But I do think that there's something important about what is said, and there is in fact this skepticism. We have at least 4 Republican U.S. Senate candidates this year who want to eliminate the election of the U.S. Senate. So this is a reality. This skepticism about democracy is afoot and land. But at the same time, this is a party that has lived on the strength of its support from poor people. 38% of John McCain's voters were folks who made well under $30,000 a year. Very much the 47% types.
Right.
And in fact, Mitt Romney is running weaker among these people this year, about 34% in some polling. But this is one of the big swing groups in American politics. Yep. Poor people swing. In 2010, when Republicans did very well, their Republican numbers were way up. The fact of the matter is, Romney's doing very dangerous politics here. Forget about ideology. This is dangerous politics. You start to drive even a portion of that populace away from you, you start to create big Democratic numbers.
One thing I would add is poor white people swing.
Well,
poor black people do not swing in terms of who they vote for.
Let me make a slight defense of the African American community, not as well as my friend here.
Well, I'm not attacking them. I'm just saying as a matter of fact of the election.
There's that 2% of the black vote that's really unreliable.
That margin of error,
African Americans there is a significant history of African American voters, low-income African American voters, in situations where a white Democratic candidate has been unacceptable for some reason.
Sure.
Where they have swung.
Sure, right.
And so
but I'm saying in presidential elections, we're talking about presidential elections, you're talking about poor people. Who is going to swing? We're talking about poor white people. Anna Marie, I want to hear from you after we take this break. Anna Marie Cox.
Well, we've been talking about the sort of conservative truism that people look at a ballot and decide who will give them the most money, and how I don't think that's true, at least when you look further down the income scale. And in fact, we were just talking about the swing voters further down the income scale, black and white, and it seems to me that they don't look at the ballot that way, but they will look at it and decide who will screw me. Like, it's not who will give me the most money, but which of these candidates is out to get me. And
Who's dangerous
to me. And so that's why, I think, Mitt Romney's had a lot of problems. I mean, this is maybe just one of them. But he's been unable to create a message, and apparently doesn't even want to create a message because he's writing off those voters.
But let me also say this. I mean, I think what's interesting about the discussion we're having about how voters self-identify and how useful as an analytic tool these kind of class categories are, whether that class is makers-takers distinction or whether that class is the white working class, which is an analytical category we use on the left a lot, right? And we sort of wring our hands over how do we lose? No, I'm serious.
Romantically recall the 30s.
Yeah, there's a whole literature about how do we lose the white working class. What is also interesting here to sort of just bring one more level is this has been a terrible week for Mitt Romney. Structurally, I think if you asked anyone if you held the election tonight, who would win? Barack Obama would win, right? And yet, it's all fluctuating in a fairly narrow band. Yeah. I mean, for all that's happened in this week, and the polling at 7 points down nationally, which is quite big. But if you look at the average of polls, everything is sort of we shouldn't overstate how much things are moving, and partly that is because big demographic groups are already baked into the cake. They just might not be the kinds of analytical categories that either Mitt Romney's talking about in a secret tape or we're talking about in our analysis.
Yeah,
right?
There are a couple of things that are left out of that, I think, and one especially that people overlook is there's a very strong aspirational aspect to this. You have low-income people who expect to do better in life, tend to be politically more conservative, tend to politically identify more with the Republican Party. Very low-income people who don't expect to do any better tend to be very strong with the Democrats. And you're right. A lot of this these votes are already decided. But I think it's important to keep in mind that you have this enormously charismatic incumbent president who's having trouble breaking 50%. I mean, that's a real indicator that something's wrong.
Well, you have 8% unemployment.
Yeah, not only and then if you take it down into the states and different areas where things are doing better, the president does better, and in particular, and that's what I think I want us to pay attention to as well. That besides looking at the country in its entirety and breaking it down by racial groups, if we want to do that, the country is moving towards more people of color, right? And so then as we continue to be more in the population, and in that equation we were talking about swing voters of black and white, we forget Latinos, we forget Asian Americans as well.
The Republican Party forgets them.
But they don't. I mean,
they don't forget. In fact,
grotesquely untrue.
Actually, they forget that they need to appeal to them in a way that.
I don't think that's true.
What they're trying to do is that they're trying to appeal to them in different ways, so that it's not trying to appeal to them as a Latino American or as an Asian American. I'm going to appeal to you in terms of your wealth, in terms of your wealth, in terms of your education, and sort of, so that there's different ways to appeal to that.
We should also. I don't think
Did you watch the convention?
I did. I was there, and I have to agree with her, though.
No, but
I was at the convention. I didn't watch it. I was physically in the room, and I agree with her.
Let's divide two things.
I was as well. It was like Latina night.
Let's distinguish.
Yeah, it was like Latina.
Right, but let's distinguish between two things. What are the policies of the Republican Party? The policies represent largely the policies that would favor both their financial base and their demographic base. The demographic base tends to be older, white, conservative men, right? Yep. And those are the folks who, for instance, there are people who are on Medicare who are going to be above the 55-year-old threshold that Paul Ryan has put to cut off, right? We don't want to cut you people off, our voters, right? And is extremely right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Extremely skeptical about the process, the demographic process that's happening in America. That you're right, that the country is growing less white and more racially diverse, and extremely angry about the incursions of illegal immigration, the notion that people are going to get a free pass and amnesty. Right? These are genuinely felt things that power the demographic base of the Republican Party, which means that the positions that are taken in the primary and the positions that have been taken by the House Republican caucus and the Republican caucus in the Senate have been very hard line on this issue. Now, that's one set of things about what is motivating the policies. Then there's the fact that they're going into a national election in which Latinos are a larger and larger part of the vote share, and they cannot get killed among that demographic by the amount that John McCain got killed by, which was 30 points, which is around where they were polling. And Mitt Romney himself told the donors behind closed doors, if we lose Latinos in a permanent way, the way that we've been losing them, we are screwed long-term as a party. So they understand that from a political perspective, but they are caught between the political exigencies of running this national election among a more diverse electorate and the desires, the strong, I would say, tribal desires of a huge part of their demographic base.
Yes, well, and the regional basis as well. I mean, this is the thing, and that's the key of the analysis: a national party.
Right.
If the Republican Party wants to remain a national party, they need to figure out what their strategy is. Or I guess they've figured it out, which is they have a national strategy and they have a local strategy, but they're going to lose that national strategy if they keep going the way they are.
And this is an interesting thing, because Kevin made an important point. At the Republican National Convention, a major effort was made to do outreach. And it was, and I think there were people who were sincerely committed to doing it. The governor of New Mexico gave a stellar speech about being a Latina who had switched from Democrat to Republican. And yet, as they're doing all this effort, anybody who's actually watching the convention knows that when Jan Brewer, the militant on immigration issue, when she rose to announce the Arizona delegation's votes, she got the longest, loudest, spontaneous applause from the convention. And the problem is this: you can put people up who really are sincere, but when it is so obvious that the base of the party passionately is uncomfortable with this change.
Yes. Kevin, I want to hear from you right after take a break. All right, we started at the tape, right? But we've now gone a long tour through the. But I think this is an important thing, because I think what the tape shows is the ways of understanding the electorate and the categories into which it breaks. And I think one of the things, aside from the offensiveness of the Romney comment, was just the sheer analytical bankruptcy of it as a tool for understanding how the electorate, which was, I think, if I'm a Republican, disturbing from the guy that is running for national office, who should really understand who the voters are, where they are.
Can you imagine what Karl Rove thought when he saw that tape?
I know.
imagine there was a lot of tables.
Karl Rove goes down to
Exactly.
the minister in the Columbus suburbs who has 7 friends, who is ID'd.
And I can tell you exactly what Karl Rove thought. Karl Rove thought, there's a Senate race in Michigan I may want to shift some money to. And, Karl Rove sits on a pot of money that's supposed to be presidential.
Yeah.
But because we've blown up campaign finance laws in this country, can become senatorial.
And they're
House.
making I think we're going to talk about that soon, right? I mean, like how much outside funding is going into these local races.
And I think, I follow this. This fascinates me. Karl Rove is actually in charge of this operation. I mean, he's not him alone.
It's called American Crossroads,
but it's
partnership
also,
on Crossroads
many
GPS.
allies running other ones, and he's the big kid, so he sends a signal. If Karl Rove decides, as he did say with Christine O'Donnell in 2010, if he just decides Mitt Romney is sort of not competent, I'm not going to waste my money on this guy, that is not necessarily a good thing for Democrats.
No.
Because if he decides to go down ballot, he can move money.
And one of the things that's really fascinating here is that when we're saying the fluctuations that have happened on the national polling, even in swing states, has been within it's fluctuated, and the president's gotten much better after the convention, but much better in a relatively small area that's not true of the Senate. What's happening in Senate races is remarkable. I mean, the shift has been quite sizable, and I would even say tectonic. And I want to sort of figure out what the basis of that are.
Well, that's the focus. You're talking about sort of shifting to the down ballot. That's the reason why we get a Jan Brewer and pushing, these policies on the state, on the state level. This is how we get judges on state Supreme Courts, sort of pushing those extreme things. And so interesting to me that they say we don't want activist judges on the court, and then all the places.
So you're talking about extreme views on illegal immigration that are shared by 80% of Americans.
Oh, they're not. I don't think SB 1070s is not polling 80%.
But let's extend it out. I think,
but having very strong restrictionist attitudes about illegal immigration pulls very, very big numbers.
But the DREAM Act also pulls a plurality. People have very conflicted views on that.
I don't think that's what you were saying. I think you're talking about a range of extreme views.
Yes, so not only on immigration, that we're talking about abortion. We're talking,
Is there a Democratic office holder in this country who's not an extremist on abortion?
Yes.
I mean, the Democratic Party is 100% abortion on demand in every situation. If you look at where the Democratic platform is versus the average American median voter,
I disagree. I think people's views on abortion, like immigration, are incredibly self-conflicted.
Yes.
You could cobble different majorities.
You have a pretty big number of Americans who have basically George W. Bush's view, which is abortion legal in some circumstances, but restricted in others, and legal in situations like
when you zoom into the sum.
Well, right, it's not so different. Yeah.
When you view into some, look, the polling on abortion,
but it's not Ruth Bader Ginsburg's.
The polling on abortion is a show in and of itself because it is so conflicted. But on this extreme question, to me, what's really interesting is Republicans didn't just take over the Congress in 2010. They took over state legislators. And those two votes are highly correlated because increasingly when people go in to vote, right, they're voting for the National Party. They're voting for these. And the way our government is acting, particularly at the national level, is increasingly parliamentary, right? Party discipline has increased. And so what you're seeing is a nationalization of the election. What's happening is the elections get more nationalized. They look more like a parliamentary system while we retain the old system of these sort of kludgy institutional framework. Kevin Williams smiling at me calling the Constitution kludgy. Key races are shifting decisively towards the Democrats at all levels right now, and I want to figure out why that's the case. Up next. Because we're interactive here on Up with Chris, live viewer email coming in during the show saying, you must realize the double entendre behind poor people swing. I think some do, but my experience is it's slightly more well-off than I see. So that's from a swinger just letting us know what he thinks about the terminology. The polling bump President Obama got from the Democratic National Convention has subsided some, but voter enthusiasm remains high. Combine that with a bad week for Mitt Romney, and you get a more and more indications of a beginning national wave against Republicans. And it's coming this week when states have started early voting. As of this morning, half the states are already casting ballots. At the top of the Democratic ticket, President Obama has strengthened his support among voters, and in the last week, a raft of new polls show key Senate races now favoring Democrats. In the U.S. Senate race in Virginia, a new Washington Post poll gives the former Democratic Governor Tim Kaine an 8 percentage point lead over former Republican Senator George Allen. A Quinnipiac New York Times CBS News poll shows Democratic Representative Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin neck and neck with former Republican Governor Tammy Baldwin and Tommy Thompson Wisconsin for the Senate seat there, and that's after Tammy Baldwin had been polling behind for a while.
She was down by 9 points.
She was down by 9 points. Yeah. A month ago, the same poll showed Baldwin down 6 points. In Connecticut Senate race, Democratic Representative Chris Murphy leads Republican Linda McMahon 37 to 33%, according to a University of Connecticut Hartford Courant poll. A month ago, Murphy trailed McMahon by 3 points. And in Massachusetts, a race we're going to talk about in just a bit, Elizabeth Warren had the lead over Republican Scott Brown in 4 out of 5 polls released this week. That's after months of polling that showed her trailing Brown. Nate Silver, who forecasts the down ballot races, and his 538 blog for the New York Times, wrote on Thursday, the Democrats' chances of controlling the Senate have increased to 79% in the forecast, up from 70% on Tuesday. Had we run the model a month ago, based on polls through August 19th, the Democratic chances of maintaining Senate control would have been listed at just 39%. In the House, Democrats still have an uphill battle to win back the House, but according to the Real Clear Politics average of the polls, they now have an advantage on the generic congressional vote, which is when you ask people, are you going to vote for the Republican or the Democrat? That was not a case just a month ago. It's a pretty stunning turnaround. It prompts the obvious question. What has changed? And John, you have been covering a lot of races, Senate races.
Yeah.
What's your theory of what this shift has been about?
Well, I think it's a multiple shift. It's not just one, but I won't make it too complicated. The fact of the matter is that in most of America, we have become parliamentary. We have, and I hear this not just from pollsters who are seeing it as well, but also from people who work the doors, people who are actually doing it. And they're saying, you go to the door in a state assembly race or a state Senate race, and they start talking to you about presidential as if this is all connected. Many of the Senate candidates around the country, at a point when Barack Obama was not polling very well and when, frankly, the Republicans were looking pretty strong, aligned themselves quite closely with the national ticket. It has become a burden. And the classic case where it's become a burden, I'll give you just the Warren-Brown debate, where Elizabeth Warren repeatedly said, this is about control of the Senate, and I'm for Barack Obama. I want him to be president.
She was very explicitly, and obviously makes sense in a state where Barack Obama was up 22 points in the polling, nationalizing that race. But what's fascinating to me is how nationalized it is everywhere. I was just in Las Vegas, which is not just anywhere in America, right? It's a very distinct place, a distinct set of problems. I was amazed at how nationalized the race was there, and I want to show you a little bit of my interview with Shelley Berkley running for Senate there right after this break.